Welcome to the CITT Toronto Area Council podcast, the place where supply chain industry leaders discuss the big issues, one strategic challenge at a time. I'm Tom Paul, CCLP. I'm the chair of the CITT Toronto Area Council, and I'm hosting tonight's discussion on the topic of international supply chain and the impact of COVID-19. I'm joined tonight by my fellow CCLPs, George Beck, who's got a little over 20 years of supply chain and sales experience. We've got Valery Kucherenko, who's international pricing and marketing specialist. And we've got Perry Lowe, who has a little over 18 years of international freight logistics experience. Just for context, George and I are not exactly experts in international logistics, so we're just going to be asking the questions. And we're going to be relying on Perry and Valery for all the answers. So so we'll just launch right into it. So Perry, for those of us who aren't as familiar with international logistics, can you just give us a quick definition of what is international freight forwarding?
Sure. So international freight forwarding is basically the movement of cargo from someplace to Canada or from Canada to another place, another country. We usually use ocean or air modes of transportation. And I can tell you, Canada's largest trading partners obviously are the United States, but China is up there, and so is Japan. So a lot of the international freight that we see comes from Asia and also from Europe as well.
Okay.
So we'd like to start off in the technology field, and because technology is such a big thing for everybody today. And in terms of technology, what are we seeing having a positive or negative effect on international freight forwarding due to COVID? Like, what's the impact of technology? Is it good? Is it bad? Is there a focus on particular technologies?
It's a great question, George, and thank you for asking that one. And frankly speaking, I started supply chain, like international supply chain, many years ago when, there was literally paper documents moved around, sent to customs and then from customs back to the customer. Definitely those days are gone, but I can tell that still even today, quite a lot of processes still based on those, outdated, paper-based documentation processes. I would say probably for the last 5 years, there's been acceleration in terms of, the change of how the documents are being managed, and especially quite a lot of documents they've been converted from paper-based to more of a soft version of the documents. But the problem and the challenge is that the processes themselves are still based on the all outdated, manner and the process of moving, documents from A to B, from B to C, and so on and so forth. So that drags that, process. Over the last probably couple of years, there's been quite a lot of changes in terms of, optimizing even that process and not just changing or converting the processes from being pure paper to more software. Into re-engineering how it actually works. There's been quite a lot of EDI solutions and API recently implemented that actually streamlines the process and changes the fundamental function of the processes, which is actually what I've witnessed probably for the last year, especially with Maersk launching their tread lanes that we will hopefully talk a little bit later on today. But that's the fundamental change in how the processes actually work. Instead of just shifting from papers to software-based PDF documents, the actual processes are being changed. And that's probably the biggest change that I've seen over the couple of decades now, to be frank. And this is interesting, times that we're living in, because, for past 100 years, it's all been based on the same process, paper to paper, but now it's being actually drastically changed to a new way of handling documents. Perry, do you have any other comments?
Yeah, no, I agree completely with Val. The processes that we're very much used to are still there, but there has been a shift towards using technology, to your point, George. And I see it sort of two pillars. One is on visibility and one is on analytics. So on visibility, we're seeing efforts by, let's say, airlines to use e-airway bills. Canada Customs this year has just launched the e-manifest program. They finally put that into place. And that's all about visibility and being able to see, what's coming. And gone are the days when you have to call your freight forwarder and say, where is this? You got to tell me where it is. Now they're expecting all this information to be pushed out. Secondly, on analytics, we're talking about everything from digitization to blockchain to big data, where you have processes that are now going to be automated. And I think that is coming down the line, but unfortunately, the speed at which we have to do it is not keeping up with the speed of business. You look at what has happened this year with COVID-19, everybody is at home ordering, and e-commerce is just, next day deliver. I want a 2-hour delivery now. So, definitely there is a big impact on freight forwarding from technology, and I'm excited to see what comes up next.
So would you say that COVID has actually helped expedite some of this paperless environment so that the companies are, because
I would say definitely. So, players or freight forwarders who are not prepared for that shift, who are still in the Stone Age, won't survive or will be bought out.
Yeah.
Val, what do you think?
I totally agree, and that's actually a pretty good comment, because essentially there is no way back, or to, there's no way to stay, aside and witness that. Actually, you have to be part of that stream, or you will be out of the game. Because essentially, with the big players coming in, like Maersk, like Air Canada, those big guys, when they bring the muscles and they actually change the industry and the way it works, unless you adopt as one of the stakeholders in the supply chain, there's no way to survive. You will be either outdated in a couple of years, and there will be no way for you to survive, or you will be bought by somebody else, and you will literally stop existing as a business provider. Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Perry, you had mentioned something about blockchain. That was actually the subject of our last podcast. And so is blockchain, does it play a big part in international freight forwarding then? Is that something that, or is that more coming in the future?
I would say it's coming in the future. Val mentioned TradeLens, which is an initiative by Maersk and IBM, which they spearheaded it, but there are a number of carriers on board now. But there are a lot of blockchain initiatives out there, which we as freight forwarders are looking at with interest, but we're not dipping our toes into it because sometimes you don't want to be the first one. There's one called Callista. There's one that's being spearheaded by DP World, which is a Dubai Ports World. So they have the backing of UAE. There's even one called like the China-Europe blockchain initiative, where obviously that's focused on those two areas. So I see it more, it is coming. The fact that we need to have this trusted distributed ledger, and so that you can go entirely paperless and have that trust in place, that is coming. But whether or not the standards are going to be all together and everybody can jump on board on day one, that remains to be seen. I think it's going to be, one thing that we're going to look at forward to, especially for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Perry, that's actually great to hear from freight forwarding community that you understand that it is common, and this is something that you have to adopt when the big players step in, such as in DP World and Maersk and you name it, right? Because essentially, once the big boys come into play, you either have to adopt and be part of that, or you will be outdated, as we mentioned before. The interesting part is that as I was preparing for today's chat, I looked at the trade lanes by Maersk, and I was literally quoting a couple of statements, and that they essentially removing the friction, they're implementing the digital platform, and they're trying to come up with innovative solution to all stakeholders. And this all stakeholders line actually emphasizes the fact that unless everybody is on the line, from shipper in Asia to receiver in North America and Europe, to shipping line, to airline, to freight forwarder, to customs, which is actually government, right? So we're not only talking about the private parties, but also about the government and the agencies and the inspection parties. Unless everybody's online, it's hard to implement. But when the big companies such as, the international brand names push that agenda really hard, and that's what they're doing, there's no way to escape. You have to adopt, you have to be part of that. And eventually that means that in a couple of years, maybe more, nobody knows when exactly, but that will come. It's just a matter of when, not if.
So those would be good compliance issues to have, because the end game is better visibility, better analytics.
Yeah. Agreed completely, George.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Let's move on to the environment. Just a curiosity, it's a topic close to me about the environment and how we treat ourselves and what we're going to leave for our kids. What effect has COVID had on any plans to reduce greenhouse emissions and be a contributor to the Paris Accords? Like the freight forwarders today, or particularly the big ocean lines like the Maersks of the world, what are they doing, and what do they see in the future for being compliant? emission controls?
That's an interesting topic, to be frank. And the reason being is that a couple of years ago, Maersk is one of the major players in the shipping line world, believe it or not, they still are. They announced that they want to become carbon neutral by 2030. And actually today they made a statement that they're actually going to be launching the first carbon neutral vessel by 2023. I don't know why is it actually today, but actually the announcement was official today. So
I saw that today.
Yeah, so essentially what they're doing is that they said that we will exceed our target by 70 years and we'll launch our first vessel, which is going to be 2,000 TEUs, and it's going to be deployed in one of the intra-region networks. But essentially that will be the first vessel that will use not typical fuel, a low sulfur fuel, but that will be using e-methanol or biomethanol that essentially will be also equipped with the recuperation system that actually makes the whole process carbon neutral. So essentially they're beating themselves by 7 years. So it's not actually something that will come into the future. It actually comes in pretty much in 2 years from now.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another initiative that was announced by CP. Back in December, they actually launched the project of building the first locomotive that will be powered by hydrogen systems. So essentially, they're shifting from traditional diesel powered locomotive systems to a new system. So there are two big companies that actually heavily working on that one. So it's not something, again, the pipe dream, so to say. It's actually coming to our life in the nearest future.
Has COVID changed those plans? Like, has it accelerated that, or has it slowed things down in those initiatives?
Well, it looks like actually it's accelerating. The reason being is that everybody's looking for more efficient, more carbon neutral solutions, and definitely with more emphasis on supply chain, all eyes on supply chain, right from production to delivery. So obviously companies are actually paying more attention to making that one of the top agendas, not one of the at the bottom, but actually making it one of the top topics, to bring to the market. So that's definitely accelerated over the last year, for sure.
Okay, very cool.
Let me just add to Val's comments as well.
Yeah.
So Maersk did that announcement today. Wallenius Wilhelmsen Lines, which is a ro-ro carrier, also announced that they want to launch their wind-powered only vessel soon as well. Yeah. That's on the ocean side. Then you have the airlines, who are, and I think a U.S. airline, either United or American, recently tested a biofuel flight. So you're seeing all these initiatives, and ESG, I think, is really a hot topic. Even after COVID, because companies want to be seen doing the right thing for the environment. Just like George said, we want to leave something green for our kids. There was one thing that started last year, which I think COVID sort of pushed aside, which is the IMO 2020 initiative. For those of you who don't know, IMO is the International Maritime Organization. They came out a few years ago and said, all the bunker fuel, the dirty fuel that's being used for all these ships that ply the world's oceans, need to use low sulfur fuel starting in 2020. If you use low sulfur fuel, then you will basically contribute to the greening and reduce our carbon footprint. If you don't use low sulfur fuel, then your only option is to put in scrubbing technology to remove the exhaust coming from your engines. Now, many carriers actually retrofitted their vessels, or started to, at the beginning of 2020. But with COVID's impact, the bunker fuel price dropped so dramatically that it was still cheaper for them to pay for bunker fuel as opposed to paying more for low sulfur fuel. And ultimately, it sort of delayed the IMO 2020 initiative. I hear it's now coming back when all these vessels have their schedule integrity back. But I think that, it remains to be seen, but there is definitely a push for more, green tech and having less of a carbon impact on our environment.
Okay.
On the subject of equipment, so we've been hearing that there's kind of an imbalance developing of container equipment. Like in the East, then production is really ramping up, but in Western countries, then the ports are really at capacity. Is that the case? And if so, how's that being addressed?
Oh, that's my favorite topic for the last couple of months. It's been all over the news, guys, I can tell you. But I mean,
that's why we asked it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, George. I really like that question. But frankly speaking, if we look back, like at the beginning of 2020, what happened, right? When the COVID-19 has been announced and, everybody went into lockdown. So essentially, the demand dropped down so dramatically that nobody expected that. The only reason for shippers and manufacturers and buyers was to literally, put it on hold and see what's going to happen. So in the real world, what it means is that for the shipping lines, there was no bookings, there was no cargo, right? But essentially then that demand spiked back. It came back so quickly in the second part of 2020 that again, nobody expected that. So what happened is that all that capacity that was available, it cannot be deployed at the same time. But even if you deploy it, you're capable to ship what was supposed to be shipped. But in fact, you're dealing with it pretty much 2 times the demand that was supposed to be, because roughly 5,000 million TEUs or 20-foot equivalent containers were shifted from Q2 to Q4, which created an enormous demand for capacity, for equipment, for pretty much all the parts of the supply chain. So it's like if you try to book, one table and then you cancel that, but at the same time you decided to book 2 tables 2 hours later, you're not able to, to squeeze the same amount of 2 times more people into the same, restaurant or using one table. So essentially that what happened to the international supply chain, the demand spiked so drastically that nobody was able to, to accommodate that. Nobody was planning for such a spike. So essentially that resulted in a lack of capacity on vessels, a lack of equipment, which is something that is hard to find. Like even if you deploy vessels or redeploy them from trade to trade, which what shipping lines have been trying to do, the number of containers is kind of fixed in time. You cannot just book them. You cannot produce them immediately. It's something that is fixed. It's a constant. So essentially, that was one of the main reasons why the backlog happens, is that there was not enough capacity on vessels, and then there was not enough containers to accommodate for the spike of in demand. So that's essentially what was the story of 2020, from nothing to pretty much the significant increase that was not expected by anyone. So that's the story of 2020 and the backlog.
So are they sending big ships back to the Orient with lots of empty containers? Like, like it's just phenomenal. It's wondering how they're able to deal with this, because these are big steel boxes. It's not like they're in pieces where you can take them apart and get better utilization and ship them back. Although maybe they should look at that. Maybe they need to look at different things. They've been shipping in ocean containers for how long?
So George, you've hit it right on the head, because with this imbalance, usually what happens is on the head haul, that's when the carriers make money, when they come from the East to North America. And then they fill up the empty containers with like agricultural products, soybeans, so that they have some paying cargo on the backhaul. Yeah. That usually works when you have balance and when you have schedule reliability. But this year, or in 2020 and the beginning of this year, there has been no reliability, and they would rather forego the export cargo and just get them back empty because they can make so much more on the head haul.
Yeah.
I saw a video recently of the number of ships parked outside Los Angeles in San Pedro Bay. I think last week there was 500,000 TEU of cargo sitting there, not moving, and vessels were waiting 10 days to 12 days to get into port to offload. Yeah. And every week you're seeing more and more. Now, we just had Chinese New Year, and it was supposed to sort of let up. It hasn't let up, because basically the cargo has been sitting at the ports. When carriers say we want to remove a vessel, we want to blank sailings for schedule reliability, you're like, well, how do you have reliability when you're removing a vessel? Yeah. So it is a big question, and just like Val said, it's been top of mind for a lot of us in this industry as to what to do about this, because we are powerless. when a carrier says, I'm not going to load your cargo for the next 3 weeks, well, you either lose the customer or you pay double or triple.
Yeah.
And actually, they just announced, FMC has announced that they're going to do an investigation. China, as a nation, has actually called for more assistance globally to cooperate on how to manage this imbalance. But with COVID still top of mind for everybody, I can tell you, we're just going to make do until things straighten themselves out.
So it sounds like there's not really an easy solution to this one.
No, it's not a easy problem, so to say, to fix, and there is no easy solution for that. There are too many stakeholders involved.
Yeah.
It's a systemic problem with the industry as a whole, right? Like, just like Val said, pre-2020, you had vessels really shortened down on capacity because the economy wasn't great. So, they're holding on by their fingernails, and now COVID has hit. So they're even in more dire straits. And then all of a sudden you have this rush of cargo coming in Q2, Q3. Well, what can you do? So.
Okay, well, time is running short for us, but I do have one more question that, that's kind of COVID related. And that would be, you guys have been in this business for a number of years. When I see a product come in, I just use it. I don't know where it's from. But since COVID's happened, has the shift of freight volumes from one particular country to another particular country shifted? Like where apparel was made in Bangladesh is because of COVID, it's not being made there anymore. It's made somewhere else, or whether it be medical supplies, raw material, whatever. But what countries have benefited from this and what countries haven't? I guess that would be the question, right?
That's another good question, because with all the talks and conversations about changing the international setup when it comes to manufacturing, because we all know China is the powerhouse, right? Pretty much everything has been produced in China for many years, but it's been actually changing over the last I would probably say last decade, as more manufacturing was moving from China, immigrating to Southeast Asia, to countries such as Vietnam, India, Indonesia, even Singapore. And the reason being is that the wage levels in China have been increasing, right, as the economy has been growing. So that has been one of the reasons. Another reason for migration was the tensions between US and China that actually accelerated that. And then obviously with COVID, when we kind of all realized collectively that one country is pretty much the powerhouse internationally, produces pretty much majority of manufactured products. Unless you diversify the portfolio of manufacturing, like region, you kind of, you can become a hostage of the situations. And when the China is closed for COVID, then essentially there's no manufacturing. So that acceleration definitely increase over the last 12 months. And we see that more cargo is shifting towards like Southeast Asia, to these countries like India, Vietnam, Indonesia. And they actually grow in that market share of manufacturing. And that actually can be seen from, from the fact of statistics in when it comes to US import. You can see that growth from these countries, the market share is growing in those countries as they take in more and more manufacturing.
So that's a good thing. We're spreading a global wealth.
Definitely a good thing for those who buy, probably not a really good thing for those who manufacture in China. So that might be, a headache for them.
Okay, well, I think that's it for me. Tom, is there anything you wanted to?
No, Perry, did you have anything to add to that?
No. I thank you guys very much for your time. It was a pleasure. It's always fun to talk about logistics.
Yeah, I guess my last question would just be, it really feels like we've kind of just scratched the surface. We only have a limited time on these episodes, but when it comes to international freight forwarding, if our listeners are curious to learn more about the subject, what kind of resources would you suggest that we tap into?
Val?
It's hard to say. There's a number of those. Probably Lodestar. It's one of the online platforms where you can read, pretty much the latest news. And there is a Sea Intelligence, and there's a number of other resources. I don't want to name all of them, but you name it. When you put in, supply chain, there will be quite a lot.
Yeah, there's one publication I've sort of started reading quite a bit, is the Supply Chain Brain. It's it's a pretty good that you can register for the publication. They put out white papers. Some are free, some you got to buy, but it's a pretty good resource just to hear what's going on.
I'd be remiss not to put in a plug for CITT, of course.
Oh, CITT, of course.
But another
I was
publication,
wondering who is going to put in the plug for CITT. Thanks.
Inside Logistics, which is now the Canadian Transportation Magazine combined now. That's always a good reference. But yeah, no, everything that Val and George mentioned, I agree completely with.
Great. Okay, well then we'll just wrap it up there. So thank you so much to our audience for listening. Big thanks to the panelists for your participation this evening. Really, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so for our audience, if you like this podcast, if you found the information helpful, please like and share this content. And if you have any ideas for future subjects, just type it in the comments below and we'll follow up on that in future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, George. Thank you, Val.
Thank you. Thank you, George.